Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with apple cheddar twists. That's right, it's apple season, and we're getting very close to peak party season. And of course, it's always cheese season. And that's why I think the timing for this very simple but extremely delicious snack is perfect. And to get started, the first thing we'll do is grate a couple large apples into a bowl. And as you're gonna see, I actually did two different versions of this. And for this first one, I did not peel the apples, which we'll compare later to the second version, where I did. And by the way, I'm using Honeycrisp apples, which I'd love to eat, but I think they're also a great baking apple. But for this twist, pretty much any apple will work. And we don't want to grate any seeds into this. So once you think you're getting close, make sure you stop. And you can go ahead and just eat the rest. And once we have those grated, we'll go ahead and squeeze over some fresh lemon juice, which yes, does prevent the apple from turning brown. But here we're mostly using it for flavor, since we're actually going to brown the apples anyway. And then once we have our grated apple prepped, we'll head to the stove, where we will toss some butter and brown sugar into a pan set over medium-high heat. And what we'll do is give that a quick stir, and then transfer in our grated apple, along with every bit of juice. At which point we will cook this stirring until our apples are as browned as we want. And as I mentioned, I tried two different versions. And for this first one, I wanted to get a fairly dark browning on the apple, which is not only going to intensify the flavor, but also, and maybe more importantly, we are also cooking out a lot of the moisture in the apple, which is kind of key, since too much moisture is a crispy pastry's worst enemy. But anyway, right here, I thought they were looking just about perfect. So I pulled that off the heat and transferred it onto a plate, and then spread it out so it would cool down. Because we're definitely going to want to transfer this into the fridge. Since it must be, it has to be cold when we work with it. So that's exactly what I did. And while our apple fill-in is chilling, we can go ahead and open up a package of frozen puff pastry. And by the way, I've been using this one brand for like 10 years, and I still can't figure out how it's folded up. But anyway, once we eventually get that flattened out, we'll go ahead and separate that along the seams, which for this brand at least is going to give us 4 rectangles. But if you buy one that comes in 2 panels, you'll have to cut them in half. Or if it comes in one sheet, cut it in quarters. And by the way, this should be as cold as possible when you work with it. So do not take it out of the freezer until you're just about to start working with it. And then once we have that situated, we will take our now chilled apple mixture and we'll divide that evenly over 2 of these rectangles. And once we have that divided up, we'll go ahead and spread it out nice and evenly, going pretty much all the way out to the edge. And that's it. Once our apple's been applied to this still partially frozen puff pastry, we will take some freshly grated sharp cheddar cheese and we'll transfer that onto the apple. And I guess you could use a different cheese, but I really hope you don't. Alright, sharp cheddar and apple is a culinary match made in heaven, although something like a Gouda would be nice. But no matter what you use, please promise me you're going to grate it yourself. Alright, it only takes a minute, and it's a million times better than the packaged stuff. You know, the one that's coated with cellulose dust. I mean, do you really want to make your guests eat cellulose dust? Just to save a minute's worth of work? Alright, I didn't think so. And that's it. We'll go ahead and take the 2 other pieces of pastry and press that firmly over the top. And at this point, the pastry should still be very cold, but it's probably going to be pretty much thawed and starting to get nice and pliable. And theoretically, we could start cutting and twisting if we wanted. But again, one of the keys here is working with the pastry when it's very, very cold, which is why I think we should transfer this onto a sheet pan and pop it in the freezer for about 10 or 15 minutes before we slice these up. And that's going to allow for our knife to make nice, clean, straight cuts with no mashing or smashing of the layers of butter and pastry. So that's what I did. And after about 10 or 12 minutes, I pulled it out of the freezer and proceeded to cut each one of these rectangles into 6 pieces for a grand total of 12 twists. Oh yeah, he cooks and does math. And then once we have cut those into nice even strips, we will separate those just a little bit so they don't stick to each other as they thaw. And then what we'll do is wait a few minutes until these are just flexible enough to twist without breaking. Or if you twist too soon and they're too firm, the dough might crack, which as everybody knows is whack. So you're just going to have to pick one up and test. And just as soon as we can twist, we will twist. And how many times is going to be up to you. But I think we want to get at least 2 turns. And my general strategy here is give them a couple turns at first, while the dough is still nice and cold and it's easy to work with. But once we do all 12, we can go back and give them another twist or two, which is definitely an optional step. But generally, the more twists you give them, the nicer they're going to look once they're baked. Oh, and if any cheese or apple falls on the pan while you're doing this, just simply pick it up and place it on top. In fact, once we're done doing this, I think we should actually go and put some extra cheese on the top anyway, since the first person that complains that their apple cheddar twist has too much cheese will be the first. So if you're asking me, we should definitely apply some more to the top. And then for one extra step, before these go in the oven, I decided to sprinkle over a little bit of coarse sea salt, just to make them a touch more savory, and to accentuate the sweetness from the apple. And that's it. Once topped, these are ready to transfer into the center of a 425-degree oven for about 25 minutes or so, or until they're beautifully browned and look like this. Oh yeah, those do look enticing. Although the apple mixture did bake up a lot darker than I thought it would. But when you're working with puff pastry, you have to make sure it's in the oven long enough for that dough to cook, and for the bottoms to get golden brown. Or if the bottoms look kind of doughy, put them back in the oven and let them cook, since the last thing we want is a soggy bottom. Speaking of which, once baked, let's go ahead and transfer these onto a rack, where we will let them cool completely. And since the rack allows air to circulate underneath, that really does help keep these crisp. And that's it. I let those cool, and then grabbed the worst looking one and went in for the official taste. And that, my friends, if you like apple cheese and crispy pastry, is going to be something you thoroughly enjoy. Right, our apple component tastes like apple pie, which, as I mentioned, is an absolutely perfect partner for cheese, especially something like sharp cheddar. And when your delivery system for those two things is buttery, crispy puff pastry, you just know you're going to be in for a treat. My only issue with these was how dark our apple mixture got, which, by the way, did not give it enough flavor. Right, these really were incredibly delicious. But being the extremely curious fellow that I am, I decided to do another batch. And this time I peeled the apple to see if it was actually the skin of the apple making it look so dark. And then besides that, I did not cook it in the pan as long. Right, that first batch was pretty brown when we finished, whereas this batch I kept much more golden brown. And then I went ahead and filled, cut, and twisted those exactly the same. Although on this batch I didn't add any salt, just so I could compare. And that's it. I baked them at the same temp for the same amount of time, at which point they looked like this, which I thought was fascinating, since they were definitely lighter overall. But as you can see, they're still pieces of apple that have pretty much caramelized all the way to the charring point. So apparently it wasn't the skins. And how dark you cook them in the pan really is not going to matter for that aspect. And as far as the taste went, I think I did prefer the first darker batch, as did my lovely and talented wife Michelle. But to summarize, both versions were fantastic and tasted virtually identical, so you'll have to decide which way to go. I mean, you are, after all, the Oliver of your twist, and if one of your guests asks if they can please have more, just say yes. But no matter which way you go, I really did love everything about these, and I really do hope you give them a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.